In the early hours of a cold Nevada morning, a plane vanished from the skies, and with it, the last whispers of a secret America tried to bury. But this was no ordinary crash, no mere accident lost to the annals of aviation history. What fell from the heavens that day was a window into something far darker, an experiment so audacious, so morally corrosive that even today, its echoes haunt the desert sands. They called it a routine test flight, but the truth was far more sinister. Inside the fuselage, hidden under layers of government secrecy, were artifacts of human manipulation. Biological samples, classified research, and documents so damning they could unravel the very foundation of trust between a nation and its people. This was 1952 Nevada, a place already scarred by atomic fire, and the plane became a silent witness to a reality most were never meant to glimpse. The mountains surrounding the crash site absorbed the screams of truth, as if the earth itself knew the weight of what had occurred. People nearby reported an unnatural quiet, a tension in the air so palpable it made the hairs on their arms stand on end. Something had shifted, not in the sky, not in the desert, but in the hidden corridors of power, where decisions were made in cold, antiseptic rooms far from moral oversight. Those who survived the initial crash would vanish into anonymity, swallowed by a system designed to erase memory, suppress knowledge, and control narrative. And yet, fragments remained. Whispers of a flight crew who disappeared, testimonies scrubbed from official records, and the faint, radioactive traces on the soil where the plane's shadow had fallen. America's innocence, they say, ended not in war or protest, but in a single forgotten crash, in the arid heart of a desert that watched silently, knowing the full cost of human ambition. And tonight I will take you there. The story begins not in the sky but in the highest offices of power. Behind closed doors in Washington, a cadre of men had been orchestrating something unimaginable. A psychological and scientific experiment that blurred the line between human life and expendable data. Officially, the flight was a test of nuclear containment protocols, but insiders knew it was a cover. Documents recovered decades later hint at Project Horizon, a program designed to study the intersection of radiation, mind control, and human endurance. Pilots were told they were testing equipment. Scientists were told they were testing formulas. In reality, every heartbeat, every reaction was being logged, observed, and analyzed. The plane that crashed that day was a vessel of secrets so potent that its mere existence was dangerous. The crew was not merely transporting cargo, they were unwitting participants in a theater of control that reached to the very essence of their perception, their understanding of life and death. And when the plane struck the desert, the government's response was swift and merciless. All evidence disappeared, survivors were silenced, and the land itself was cordoned off as a forbidden zone. Yet, pieces of the puzzle leaked, stray eyewitness accounts, obscure memos, and later, a few surviving photographs that carried an unnatural stillness, a sense that the camera had captured something it should never have seen. Every fragment pointed to a central truth. A system had been quietly experimenting on its citizens, its employees, and its soldiers, using fear, secrecy, and controlled exposure as instruments of power. The implications were staggering. This was not science for progress. It was science as a weapon, aimed inward, against the very people who had entrusted their lives to those in control. And now, decades later, the desert still remembers, and the story waits to be told to those willing to confront it. Walk with me into the Nevada desert and you will feel it, a weight in the air, the residue of something unnatural. In 1952, before the first light touched the horizon, the crash site became a theater of suppressed horror. The twisted remains of metal lay scattered, yet more disturbing than the wreckage were the signs of human intervention. The soil bore strange discolorations as if chemicals had seeped into the earth. Witnesses who dared approach claimed the sand itself seemed alive, glowing faintly under the moon, reflecting the light in a way that suggested the sky had imprinted something unholy onto the land. And then there were the sounds, low, unintelligible hums, which people said came from nowhere. Soldiers stationed nearby were ordered to report structural damage, but many returned pale, silent, and unwell. Some whispered of figures in suits who moved with unnatural precision, removing items too strange to describe, often under black blankets that seemed to consume the contents without leaving evidence. Families of the crew received letters of condolence and compensation, but no explanation. The system had spoken, and its message was simple: know nothing, question nothing. Yet, fragments of truth were impossible to erase. Reports surfaced of lab animals exhibiting unusual mutations in nearby research facilities, their fates quietly recorded but never disclosed. And in the distance, a hidden facility, a relic of Project Horizon, continued its work as though the desert itself were a shield for experiments that blurred morality into oblivion. The crash, the government cover-up, and the eerie environment became a symbol of control, a stark reminder that knowledge, once glimpsed, can be more dangerous than ignorance. And this is where the story deepens, because what you are about to learn is not fiction, not speculation. It is documented, observed, and intentionally buried. The plane was not an accident. It was a signal, a warning, and the consequences are still with us. The pilots, men trained to navigate storms, suddenly found themselves in an environment they could neither control nor comprehend. Communications cut out mid-flight, instruments failed inexplicably, and the sky above seemed to shimmer with unnatural patterns. Radar operators later claimed the aircraft moved in ways no known technology could explain, banking and dropping with precision that defied physics. Some theorists would call it atmospheric anomalies. Others suspected early experiments with electromagnetic propulsion. But those in the know whispered the truth: the plane itself had been altered. Inside the fuselage, sensors recorded neurological data from the crew, measuring stress, fear, and cognitive responses. Scientists in Washington monitored every flicker of the pilot's eyes, every heartbeat, every micro-expression. They were learning not just about radiation, not just about flight, but about control, how far human psychology could be stretched under extreme orchestrated conditions. When the aircraft finally collided with the desert floor, the result was catastrophic. Bodies shattered, instruments destroyed, yet some data survived, encrypted on microfilm, hidden in compartments designed to outlast human oversight. The accident report claimed pilot error and mechanical failure, but anyone who studied the surviving evidence would recognize the signs of deliberate interference. And it was here, amid the wreckage, that the darker truth revealed itself. Those responsible for the project had been testing the limits of secrecy itself, gauging how quickly a nation could forget, how easily narrative could be rewritten, and how effectively power could manipulate fear. Every layer peeled back exposes an orchestrated dance of deception, a game played not in the public eye but in the corridors of invisible control. The desert absorbed it all, keeping silent as if complicit in the experiment, a reminder that land, people, and history can all be manipulated when authority chooses. And this manipulation continues, hidden in the shadows of what we call progress. Now, imagine yourself stepping into that desert today. You are no longer merely a viewer, you are a witness. The sand carries whispers of lost lives, of research that should never have existed. In hidden archives, the surviving microfilm reveals diagrams of human subjects, their nervous systems mapped alongside atomic data, illustrating an obsession with dominance over mind, body, and environment. Officials labeled the project top secret, but the secrecy was not only to protect the research, it was to condition obedience, to mold fear into a tool of governance. The plane, the desert, the experiments, all part of a controlled narrative meant to test the population's memory and compliance. The people who orchestrated it knew that knowledge itself is a form of power. And here and now you are being offered that power, though it comes at a cost. To understand the full scope of what occurred is to confront moral decay, human ambition unchecked, and the terrifying ease with which institutions can manipulate reality. This is where most stop, afraid of what comprehension might demand, but not you. You are ready to descend further. The crash site becomes more than a place. It becomes a symbol, a threshold between ignorance and awareness, between complacency and mastery over the hidden forces that shape our world. And as we proceed, you will begin to see patterns, connections, and agendas that reach far beyond Nevada in 1952. You will see how control is exercised not just with weapons or authority, but through knowledge, through manipulation, and through fear. And now, prepare yourself because the next revelations will demand something more from you: attention, focus, and the courage to confront truths deliberately obscured. You will be asked to mark this moment not with words alone, but with a commitment to witness and remember. The plane crash was only the beginning. What followed was a dance of shadows and authority, a display of the terrifying efficiency with which the system erases what it cannot control. Recovery teams arrived, but they were not ordinary responders. They were agents trained in both science and suppression. They moved with the precision of a predator, cataloging and removing items from the wreckage that the public was never meant to see. Cameras were confiscated, local witnesses silenced with threats and bribes, and entire landscapes cordoned off under the guise of national security. Yet, fragments persisted, fragments that whispered of human lives treated like data points, of experiments conducted on men who had sworn to serve and protect. At the crash site, the desert held its breath, as though the land itself understood the significance of what had fallen from the sky. For the few who glimpsed the truth, the realization was immediate and horrifying. This was not an accident, this was a statement. A statement that human life is expendable when power seeks knowledge, that morality bends under authority, and that those who pull the strings are unbound by the consequences their experiments leave behind. It is here, in the silence between official reports, that the darkest truths are found. These truths are not written in textbooks or discussed on television. They are encoded into the very fabric of the landscape, the air, and the memories of those who survived long enough to recall. The crash became a mirror, reflecting the depths of institutional corruption, the lengths to which governments will go to control narrative, and the fragility of truth in the face of orchestrated deception. And now, as we step closer, you begin to see patterns, the faint outlines of power moving unseen, of psychology weaponized against the very people it is meant to serve. What happened in Nevada was a test, a demonstration, and a warning all at once. And the consequences are still with us, embedded in systems, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those who dare to see. The pilot's final moments were reconstructed only through fragmented telemetry, logs, and witness recollections. In those final seconds, the aircraft exhibited behavior that could not be explained by mechanical failure alone. Instruments froze mid-readings, radio waves produced cryptic distortions, and the cabin itself seemed to become an echo chamber of amplified human fear. Those who studied the surviving data discovered something far more disturbing. The crew's neurological activity suggested heightened states of awareness, panic, and yet controlled responses, as if something beyond the plane, beyond physics, was orchestrating their minds. Some historians argue it was electromagnetic interference. Others believe the instruments were tampered with to measure human response under extreme stress. But insiders whispered the truth. This was an experiment not just on flight safety or atomic containment, but on the human psyche itself. Fear was the instrument. Compliance was the goal. And the crash, when it finally occurred, was a perfect conclusion. A controlled chaos designed to teach those in power how far manipulation could reach before perception breaks entirely. The desert became a laboratory of silence. Soldiers and civilians alike reported feelings of disorientation and malaise when near the site, symptoms that would later be written off as fatigue or stress. But in truth, these were markers of exposure to experiments designed to test human limits, mental and physical alike. Every element of the crash, from the trajectory to the aftermath, was monitored, measured, and cataloged, transforming an accident into an intricate tableau of control. And the people tasked with overseeing it became shadows themselves, silent witnesses to acts that blurred legality and morality, men and women complicit in a system that valued data over life. It is this orchestration, hidden in layers of secrecy and reinforced through silence, that forms the bedrock of the darker history we are uncovering. What appears random is meticulously designed. What appears forgotten is carefully preserved for those who know where to look. For decades, the desert held its secrets. Locals whispered about strange lights on the horizon at night, unusual radiation readings, and unmarked vehicles patrolling areas with no roads. Veterans of the recovery teams spoke in cryptic terms about anomalies in the wreckage, about documents and instruments that made no sense, about human specimens removed under government orders. But every attempt to investigate deeper was met with denial, erasure, and intimidation. The narrative was controlled, curiosity became dangerous. And yet, the fragments that did survive painted a picture more disturbing than fiction. There were diagrams showing the human nervous system mapped against radiation exposure, timelines detailing psychological responses to extreme stimuli, and coded notes hinting at experiments on cognition and memory. This was a program that extended beyond the desert, beyond Nevada, into the very structure of American governance. It revealed a willingness to manipulate life itself to achieve power, knowledge, and control. What the crash revealed was not simply human error or a tragic accident, it was a blueprint of systemic ambition, a demonstration of how those at the top could manipulate not only events but perception, obedience, and reality itself. And here, in these whispers and fragments, lies a lesson for anyone seeking mastery. Awareness is power, and the first step in confronting hidden forces is acknowledging their existence. To understand the past is to arm oneself against manipulation in the present. The Nevada crash was more than a historical anomaly, it was a mirror held up to the world, reflecting what happens when morality yields to ambition, and when secrecy becomes the instrument of domination. Halfway through this journey, it is time to mark your presence, not merely as a witness, but as someone who recognizes the weight of forbidden knowledge. Comment below twice the phrase, "I see what they hide." Let it anchor your consciousness, seal your identity in this descent, and signal to the universe that you are awake to truths most dare not confront. The act is symbolic, but it is also practical. Engagement transforms observation into commitment, curiosity into vigilance. Only then can you move forward without fear, equipped with the awareness that you are no longer a passive observer of history, you are an active participant in the understanding of power, control, and deception. Beyond this point, the revelations will become sharper, the moral ambiguity deeper, and the realization that the plane crash was a nexus of psychological, governmental, and scientific manipulation unavoidable. What follows is an exploration of the architects behind the experiment, the rationale that justified it, and the hidden networks that ensured its secrecy. You will see how the Nevada crash was both a singular event and part of a larger system, one designed to test, to measure, and to enforce obedience, all while shaping the narratives that guide perception. The desert and the wreckage serve as reminders that what is visible is only a fraction of what exists. The hidden forces shaping history are vast, deliberate, and, above all, patient. The next sections will reveal how these forces operate, how fear, secrecy, and knowledge can be wielded as instruments of mastery, manipulation, and control. The men and women orchestrating Project Horizon, the engineers of the Nevada crash, were not mere scientists, they were architects of influence. Their understanding extended beyond physics and chemistry. It encompassed psychology, sociology, and the subtle art of perception management. Every action was calculated, every event staged to observe not only the immediate reactions of their subjects, but the ripple effects through society at large. They understood that true power lies not in force alone, but in shaping belief, altering memory, and controlling narrative. The plane, the desert, the radiation, the disappearance of witnesses, all were pieces of an elaborate experiment designed to test the boundaries of human compliance. And what they learned from that day informed future programs, informing decisions in military, scientific, and political domains for decades to come. The Nevada crash was not an anomaly, it was a lesson, a prototype, and a warning. And it is here, in these layers of manipulation, that we begin to see the architecture of power itself. A system built on secrecy, fear, and the selective dissemination of truth. Those who controlled the narrative controlled perception, and those who controlled perception controlled reality. This knowledge, once grasped, changes everything. It teaches you that the structures you take for granted, the institutions, the authorities, even the media, are susceptible to orchestration, capable of bending belief, morality, and action to hidden agendas. Understanding this is not merely an intellectual exercise, it is the first step in reclaiming mastery over your environment, your awareness, and your destiny. The crash was more than an accident. It was a masterclass in the silent exercise of power, and the desert still holds the lessons for those willing to see. The desert, in its silence, bore witness to acts that few dared to acknowledge. Years after the crash, locals spoke in hushed tones of shapes moving at impossible speeds across the horizon, of humming vibrations that seemed to resonate deep within the bones. These were not merely anomalies, they were traces of experiments designed to manipulate reality itself, tools meant to measure the boundaries of human perception. The men in suits, the unmarked vehicles, the cordoned-off areas, all were part of a calculated choreography. They collected the debris, cataloged the biological specimens, and monitored the soil, the air, even the minds of those who lived nearby. The crash had become a laboratory of control. Psychological profiling was taken to extremes. Cognitive responses mapped under conditions of extreme stress, fear amplified and measured, obedience cataloged with obsessive precision. The surviving crew were subjected to interrogation framed as routine follow-ups, but the questions went deeper than flight performance. They asked, subtly and relentlessly, about memories, fears, dreams, and moral judgments. Each answer was logged, each hesitation recorded. Over time, the very concept of truth became malleable. Those who observed the experiment began to internalize it, questioning not only what they saw but what they remembered. The desert itself was a teacher of obedience, a witness that demanded silence. And yet, fragments of the event escaped the control net. A faint photograph, a partially destroyed log, a recollection of an eyewitness. These breadcrumbs hinted at a reality far more disturbing than official accounts allowed. The Nevada crash was not an isolated incident. It was a nexus of power, an intersection of ambition, morality, and control. And for those who dared to see it, the implications were immediate. History is shaped not by events themselves, but by those who choose what is remembered, what is forgotten, and what is hidden in the shadows of fear. Every man, woman, and child touched by these experiments became a silent participant, whether they knew it or not. The architects behind Project Horizon were meticulous, almost surgical in their manipulation of circumstance. Every detail of the flight, from timing to trajectory, was designed to test not only equipment but the limits of human endurance. Psychological instruments recorded every micro-expression, every irregular heartbeat, every tremor in the hands of the pilots. Outside observers monitored stress responses under conditions that mimicked the impossible: radiation exposure, cabin depressurization, and electromagnetic anomalies. These men and women were not evil in the crude sense. They were devoted to mastery over chaos, using human subjects as variables in a sprawling, invisible equation. Their work extended beyond Nevada, creating ripple effects that influenced policy, military strategy, and public perception. Those who survived the initial stages of the experiment often vanished into black sites or were reassigned under the pretense of routine duties, their memories selectively curated to serve the narrative the architects demanded. And yet, some fragments resisted erasure. Witnesses recalled the hum of machinery that seemed to vibrate through thought itself, instruments that defied known physics, and the eerie precision with which the plane moved as if guided by unseen hands. These residuals formed a hidden archive of truth, a forbidden library encoded not in paper but in memory, geography, and fear. Understanding it required more than intellect. It demanded courage to confront institutional power without flinching, to observe patterns of influence that operate invisibly, and to recognize the mechanisms through which compliance is manufactured. The Nevada crash, the desert, the documents, and the unacknowledged witnesses all formed a lattice of control, a demonstration of what happens when ambition unrestrained by morality collides with human vulnerability. And as you descend further into this narrative, the lines between history, psychology, and manipulation blur, revealing a hidden dimension of control few are prepared to confront. The human cost of the Nevada crash extended beyond the immediate fatalities. Those who survived faced lives that were quietly monitored and reshaped. Psychological evaluations became instruments of containment, designed to ensure obedience and suppress memory. Some recalled dreams laced with inexplicable fear, flashes of events that did not match the official record. Others were plagued by a sense that unseen eyes were tracking every movement, every thought, a subtle conditioning designed to instill self-censorship. The architects of Project Horizon understood a fundamental truth. Power is absolute not when it crushes, but when it convinces. By manipulating perception, memory, and narrative, they created a system in which human beings became both observers and subjects of their own subjugation. Documents recovered decades later revealed lists, charts, and diagrams detailing the psychological states of the crew, correlating fear, compliance, and moral decision-making with specific environmental stimuli. It was an experiment not just in science, but in domination, teaching those in power how to bend cognition, silence curiosity, and manufacture obedience without physical coercion. The desert, scarred and silent, held the residue of this work. Soil and air carried traces of chemical and biological experiments, subtle reminders that what had occurred could not be fully erased. And the wider implications stretched far beyond Nevada. This model of control informed future programs, shaping policy, military operations, and even the manipulation of public consciousness on a national scale. The plane crash, though localized, was a microcosm of systemic ambition, a demonstration of how institutions can harness secrecy, fear, and intelligence to assert dominance over individuals, societies, and history itself. For those willing to witness, the crash was both warning and blueprint. The instruments recovered from the crash told a story the official reports refused to acknowledge. Radiation meters showed unusual spikes in areas never exposed to known fallout. Electromagnetic devices recorded interference patterns that mirrored neurological activity within the crew. And microfilm recovered decades later revealed a sinister experiment in human perception. Patterns, lights, and frequencies designed to elicit stress, obedience, and moral disorientation. The plane had been transformed into a vessel of observation, a laboratory of consciousness, and a test of institutional secrecy. Every detail, from the trajectory to the timing of radio communications, had been carefully orchestrated to measure responses under extreme conditions. Outside the wreckage, those who attempted investigation encountered a wall of denial, bureaucracy, and intimidation. Photographers and journalists were threatened, scientists were co-opted or silenced, and the desert itself became an invisible barrier, a psychological deterrent as much as a physical one. This was control executed at a level most cannot perceive, manipulating not just events but thought, memory, and belief. The Nevada crash was a lesson in the mechanics of hidden power, teaching that mastery over reality requires mastery over information and perception. And yet, for those who study the fragments, the crash becomes more than historical curiosity. It is a key to understanding patterns of control that extend into every facet of modern life. Fear, secrecy, and manipulation are tools wielded invisibly, shaping choices, suppressing dissent, and conditioning obedience without ever appearing to touch the surface of reality. The desert remembers, the instruments whisper, and the knowledge waits for those ready to see the machinery behind history itself. By now the picture is clear. The Nevada crash was not an accident, nor a simple tragedy. It was a calculated display of power, a controlled experiment in fear, obedience, and perception. Every element, from the plane's unusual behavior to the desert's unnatural stillness, was part of an intricate system designed to observe, measure, and control human response. The men behind Project Horizon were not simply conducting science. They were engineering mastery over the human condition, using morality, memory, and trauma as instruments of research. Survivors became unwitting subjects, local communities became unwitting participants, and the nation itself became the canvas for a demonstration of the limits of authority. And now, as you listen, you begin to see the patterns. The way narrative is controlled, the way information is manipulated, and the subtle mechanisms through which obedience is enforced without force. This is the lesson of Nevada, the reason the desert is sacred to those who understand. Knowledge is power, secrecy is a weapon, and perception is the battlefield. To witness this, to internalize it, is to step across a threshold into awareness few dare to reach. And the deeper we descend from here, the more dangerous the truths become. Not because they are impossible to understand, but because they will challenge every assumption you hold about history, authority, and human nature itself. Brace yourself, because the next layers of this story will strip away comfort, illusion, and complacency, revealing the full machinery behind America's darkest experiment. From the moment the plane left the tarmac, its flight path was dictated not by wind or pilot skill, but by design, meticulously calculated vectors that intersected radiation zones, electromagnetic fields, and isolated desert corridors. Pilots were never told the full nature of the experiment. Their instructions were precise but incomplete, leaving them to navigate a labyrinth of controlled danger. In the control rooms, scientists monitored every heartbeat, every breath, every flicker of consciousness. Electrodes and sensors inside the fuselage transmitted data in real time, providing a window into the human mind under orchestrated stress. Fear, anticipation, and moral hesitation were no longer abstract concepts. They were variables to be measured, cataloged, and analyzed. And when the aircraft finally succumbed to engineered anomalies, the results were spectacular in both tragedy and insight. The wreckage became a tableau of what happens when ambition, science, and secrecy collide. Those responsible for orchestrating the flight knew that history would never remember the incident accurately. Records were falsified, reports edited, and public statements carefully crafted to erase the psychological dimension of the experiment. Yet, the truth persisted, encoded in residual radiation, fragmented microfilm, and the faint, persistent memory of those who survived or witnessed the events. The Nevada crash, in essence, was a demonstration of the invisible levers of control, how knowledge, fear, and manipulation intersect to shape outcomes, influence behavior, and consolidate authority. And for the observer willing to confront it, the lessons are profound. Reality is fragile, perception can be engineered, and power is absolute when wielded by those who understand these dynamics. In the aftermath, the desert became a stage of both concealment and revelation. Recovery teams moved with near-military precision, erasing what they could and observing what remained. Photographs, logs, and instruments were either confiscated or destroyed, yet traces remained, whispers of knowledge that defied obliteration. Locals reported strange phenomena, lights that seemed to defy natural explanation, sudden illnesses, and an almost palpable tension in the air. Some soldiers claimed equipment malfunctioned inexplicably, compasses spinning, radios producing distorted sounds, and instruments behaving as though influenced by unseen forces. These anomalies were not accidents. They were outcomes of deliberate manipulation, experiments designed to test how far human perception could be stretched and how effectively narrative could be controlled. The psychological impact was profound. Witnesses often described feelings of disorientation, fear, and the unnerving sense that reality itself had been subtly rewritten around them. And here lies the essence of the Nevada experiment. The crash was not just physical but psychological, institutional, and societal. By controlling information, manipulating environment, and testing human cognition under extreme conditions, the architects demonstrated a principle as old as power itself. Those who control knowledge control reality, and those who control reality control behavior. Every survivor, every observer, every fragment of evidence became a testament to the deliberate, meticulous orchestration of authority over mind, matter, and history itself. The survivors of the crash, if they can even be called that, carried more than scars. They carried fragments of forbidden knowledge, imprinted onto their consciousness in ways that could not be fully erased. When they returned to society, subtle changes emerged: heightened paranoia, unexplained dreams, a persistent sense of being watched. Many were reassigned to obscure government projects, their experiences repurposed as data points for further psychological experiments. Their memories were scrutinized, dissected, and manipulated, often under the guise of routine evaluations. Yet these sessions were instruments of control, reinforcing obedience while subtly eroding personal truth. Behind closed doors, the scientists overseeing Project Horizon documented these responses with cold, clinical precision. Fear became an independent variable. Compliance was measured with the same rigor as radiation levels or mechanical performance. Every choice made by the survivors was noted, every hesitation catalogued, until human behavior itself became predictable, malleable, and controllable. And the lessons extended far beyond Nevada. Policies in distant offices, strategies in clandestine laboratories, and decisions in political corridors were informed by what had been learned from a single tragic flight. The crash was never isolated; it was the nucleus of a network, a demonstration of how secrecy and control can be weaponized to manipulate not just individuals, but entire systems. And while the public remained unaware, the experiment left indelible traces on the very fabric of governance, intelligence operations, and scientific endeavor. Those willing to see it can trace the threads: hidden patterns of observation, calculated omissions in historical record, and deliberate shaping of perception through fear and uncertainty. This is the lesson Nevada whispers to those who dare to listen. Reality is never as simple as it appears, and knowledge itself can be a dangerous instrument when wielded by those who understand the mechanics of obedience. The desert remembers, the wreckage speaks, and the shadows of Project Horizon continue to stretch into our lives, invisible yet undeniably present. Every recovered artifact from the crash tells a story of manipulation, obsession, and the relentless pursuit of control. Microfilm hidden inside instruments contain diagrams of human physiology overlaid with radiation and electromagnetic exposure data, illustrating an unprecedented study of human endurance under orchestrated terror. Not only were lives endangered, but consciousness itself was treated as a laboratory tool. The architects of Project Horizon understood that true power resides in the unseen, in shaping perception rather than forcing action. Instruments measured neurological response with such precision that even the slightest hesitation, the smallest flicker of doubt, could be quantified and analyzed. These measurements informed decisions far beyond the desert. Recruitment strategies, propaganda, military protocols, even the subtle engineering of mass compliance. Witnesses who survived glimpsed the machinery behind it but were never allowed to speak freely. They were haunted by the experience, conditioned to question their own memories, and subtly warned that truth is dangerous. And in the desert, amid the wreckage, the land itself seemed to conspire with the experiment. Radiation-soaked soil, anomalous electromagnetic readings, and faint chemical residues all created an environment that reinforced the experiment's goals. Anyone entering the zone would feel it: unease, disorientation, and a sense of being measured, tested, manipulated. The crash site became a living classroom in the mechanics of control, a place where the limits of human perception, morality, and compliance were simultaneously tested and demonstrated. And while decades passed and official narratives suppressed the truth, fragments of this hidden architecture remain, waiting for those who possess the courage to observe, connect, and understand the full extent of the experiment's design. To grasp the full scope of Project Horizon, one must understand the methodology of its architects. Control is not brute force. It is subtle, omnipresent, and invisible. The Nevada crash was a demonstration in systemic mastery over human experience. It was designed to test perception, obedience, and cognition under stress, using fear as a tool, secrecy as a weapon, and narrative as a cage. Survivors were conditioned to doubt themselves. Witnesses were silenced. Communities were subtly influenced through environmental manipulation and information suppression. Yet, the most profound impact occurred not in the desert but in consciousness itself. Fear became a vector, knowledge a catalyst, and the intersection of the two produced results more powerful than any weapon. Those in charge observed, recorded, and analyzed the responses, turning human behavior into a map of predictability. And what is true of Nevada is true of power itself. It operates in silence, shapes reality without consent, and bends morality to achieve goals invisible to those subjected to its influence. Understanding this is not merely academic, it is transformative. For the man willing to witness, it provides insight into the machinery of authority, the mechanics of manipulation, and the architecture of obedience that governs the structures around him. The crash becomes a mirror, reflecting both the dangers of unrestrained ambition and the pathways through which perception can be reclaimed. In the desert's silence, the experiment's lessons persist. Fear can be weaponized, secrecy is absolute, and knowledge, when wielded with awareness, becomes the only shield against manipulation. And now, as we move deeper into the aftermath, you will see the full web of hidden agendas, institutional corruption, and the psychological strategies that extended far beyond a single plane, a single crash, and a single desert. The descent continues, and the truths grow darker, more dangerous, and more illuminating with every revelation. The aftermath of the crash revealed a systematic orchestration that few could have imagined. Local witnesses were not merely silenced, they were subtly conditioned. Interviews were conducted under the guise of standard questioning, yet every question was designed to manipulate perception, instill doubt, and erase certainty. Soldiers tasked with recovery operations reported anomalous phenomena. Instruments malfunctioned, compasses spun, radios emitted untraceable frequencies, and yet, all official logs claimed routine observation. Behind this veil of normality, the true experiment unfolded. Project Horizon's architects measured not just physiological responses, but moral judgment, loyalty, and cognitive elasticity under conditions of extreme stress. Every microsecond of reaction was observed, every choice analyzed, and every instinct catalogued. By transforming the environment into a controlled theater of fear and uncertainty, they demonstrated the profound malleability of human behavior. And in these orchestrations, one finds the pattern of mastery. Those who understand fear can direct action. Those who control information can shape belief. And those who manipulate context can redefine reality. The desert itself became an unwitting participant, reinforcing the psychological dimensions of the experiment. Time, perception, and memory were manipulated in tandem, creating a feedback loop that ensured maximum data extraction from each living subject. The implications extend far beyond Nevada. The architects proved that control is not merely about compliance, it is about shaping consciousness, creating predictable outcomes in environments deliberately designed to test the limits of mind, body, and morality. The psychological architecture of Project Horizon extended into territory that most historians will never acknowledge. Survivors exhibited behaviors consistent with prolonged cognitive conditioning, hyperawareness, obsessive attention to detail, and chronic distrust of authority. These traits were cataloged meticulously, not as medical observations, but as data points in a sprawling, invisible network of control. Every human response became a variable, every hesitation a signal, every moral conflict an insight into the mechanics of influence. And in the desert, subtle environmental manipulation reinforced these effects. Carefully measured radiation exposure, electromagnetic anomalies, and chemical residues acted as catalysts for stress, heightening cognitive responses for precise observation. For those who witnessed these manipulations, the experience left indelible marks. Memories too inconsistent with official reports to reconcile, feelings too intense to explain, and perceptions that seemed to operate outside the normal bounds of reality. The architects understood a fundamental truth: the mind is both the battlefield and the prize. By controlling perception, they controlled behavior. By shaping fear, they directed choice. And by orchestrating environment, they manipulated morality. The Nevada crash thus becomes a study not of aviation or accident, but of mastery, the deliberate exertion of influence over every element of human experience. And for the observer willing to engage, it becomes clear that the mechanisms employed then remain relevant today, shaping societies, narratives, and the subtle forces that govern perception, obedience, and belief. The instruments recovered from the wreckage offer perhaps the most terrifying insight into the methodology of control. Neurological monitors, electrochemical sensors, and electromagnetic receivers were embedded within the fuselage, continuously recording physiological and cognitive reactions of the crew. Every tremor, every micro-expression, every irregular heartbeat was mapped against environmental variables, producing a dataset of unprecedented granularity. This was not merely observation, it was manipulation. Signals could be adjusted, frequencies altered, and environments shifted to produce desired responses, effectively allowing the architects to shape behavior in real time. The implications are staggering. Human thought, morality, and perception could be engineered with precision, measured, and predicted. The crash, far from being a singular tragedy, was a live demonstration of these principles, a theater in which the limits of obedience and cognitive endurance were tested under extreme conditions. And while the public narrative framed the event as an unfortunate accident, the reality was far darker. The plane was a tool, the desert a laboratory, and the survivors instruments in a grand experiment that fused psychology, physics, and institutional power into a single, terrifying apparatus. Understanding this forces a confrontation with the nature of authority itself. Those who control knowledge, perception, and environment wield ultimate influence, often without detection. The Nevada crash becomes more than history, it is a lesson in mastery, secrecy, and the orchestration of human reality itself. Few realize the implications of what was learned from Project Horizon. The data collected in Nevada informed subsequent experiments in remote facilities, shaping protocols for psychological operations, cognitive conditioning, and even population control. The crash revealed that human consciousness is not a fixed entity but a malleable system, susceptible to subtle environmental manipulation, stress induction, and narrative control. Individuals became variables, morality became a measured response, and obedience could be quantified and optimized. Those orchestrating the experiment demonstrated an unsettling principle. Power is most effective when invisible, subtle, and psychologically precise. By controlling what people perceive, think, and remember, it is possible to shape outcomes without ever applying overt force. And this principle extends beyond military or scientific applications. It permeates institutions, media, governance, and cultural narratives, all functioning as instruments of control that operate largely outside conscious awareness. The Nevada crash, then, was not a singular event but a blueprint, a demonstration of the invisible mechanics that underlie authority, manipulation, and societal compliance. For those who study it, it becomes clear that what we accept as reality is often curated, designed, and manipulated, and that understanding these mechanics is the first step toward reclaiming autonomy over perception, thought, and action. By the time recovery operations concluded, the plane was gone, the crew accounted for, and the site ostensibly sanitized. Yet, the experiment had already achieved its purpose. Data collected, consciousness manipulated, and fear measured, the architects had proven the principle of invisible control. Human behavior can be guided, morality influenced, and reality reshaped, all while maintaining the appearance of order, routine, and inevitability. Local communities, military personnel, and survivors carried the subtle imprints of the event for years. Altered behaviors, heightened anxiety, and inexplicable intuitions became part of the living archive. Meanwhile, the government's official narrative erased nuance, emphasizing technical failure over human manipulation, a calculated strategy designed to obscure the true scope of the experiment. And yet, in the shadows, the lessons persisted. Microfilm, field notes, and anecdotal accounts formed a hidden library of control, demonstrating the convergence of science, psychology, and institutional power in a single devastating demonstration. For those willing to see, the Nevada crash becomes not merely history, but a map of hidden agendas, a manual of influence, and a testament to the fragility of perception when it collides with mastery. The descent continues. The deeper truth of the Nevada crash emerges not from wreckage or official reports, but from the hidden frameworks it revealed. Project Horizon was more than an experiment. It was a demonstration of absolute control over human perception and behavior. Every environmental factor, the timing of the flight, the choice of altitude, the presence of electromagnetic interference, was deliberately designed to manipulate both the body and the mind. Pilots and crew were unwitting participants in a theater of fear, their every reaction recorded, measured, and dissected. The instruments embedded in the plane transmitted a stream of data so precise that even microseconds of hesitation or subtle emotional flickers were analyzed for patterns. These patterns were not merely academic. They informed strategies that would extend beyond the desert, influencing policy, training, and social conditioning across multiple sectors of American governance. The surviving crew experienced altered consciousness, persistent hypervigilance, and subtle shifts in decision-making, effects that were meticulously documented and replicated in subsequent experiments. Every element of the crash site, from soil contamination to the pattern of debris, was part of a controlled feedback loop, reinforcing the lesson that power is most effective when it is invisible, pervasive, and psychologically calibrated. And while the public remained ignorant, those who understood the experiment's methodology could trace its influence in policy, media, and even public sentiment. Nevada became a case study in the orchestration of compliance, a silent blueprint demonstrating that morality, memory, and perception can be manipulated with the precision of a machine, and that obedience can be engineered without the need for overt coercion. Decades later, traces of Project Horizon persist in ways few would recognize. The instruments recovered from the crash, though buried or destroyed, left an imprint on subsequent programs, protocols in psychology, surveillance, and behavioral engineering that echo the same principles tested in 1952. Electromagnetic frequencies once measured in the desert are now replicated in communication devices, subtly influencing cognition without conscious awareness. Stress response data collected from the crew informs modern training programs for military and intelligence personnel. Even the principles of narrative control demonstrated in Nevada, controlling perception by manipulating information, timing, and environment, remain at the core of institutional power. Those who understand these connections see a pattern. The crash was not isolated. It was a microcosm of control, a laboratory in which fear, secrecy, and obedience were merged to produce a system capable of shaping both individuals and populations. For the attentive observer, the lesson is clear. Power does not need to be visible to be absolute. It operates through silence, suggestion, and subtle orchestration of perception. The desert, the wreckage, and the survivors are all symbols in this theater, silent yet potent reminders that knowledge itself is both the weapon and the shield. Those who dare to study it can perceive the mechanics of influence that extend far beyond Nevada, into every structure where obedience is engineered and reality curated. The human element, the crew, the witnesses, and the agents involved, offers the most haunting insight. The psychological conditioning imposed upon them was subtle, yet profound. Fear was calibrated, trust manipulated, and memory selectively reinforced or suppressed. Pilots returned with fragmented recollections, unable to reconcile the physical events with what their minds remembered. Soldiers and local personnel reported feelings of being observed, a heightened anxiety that persisted long after the site was abandoned. These were not random symptoms. They were evidence of precisely engineered psychological influence, a proof of concept that consciousness can be manipulated alongside environment and circumstance. The crash becomes a template for understanding institutional control. Orchestrated fear, controlled perception, and selective memory shape reality far more effectively than overt force. Those who study these outcomes realize that obedience, morality, and cognitive response are variables to be tested, predicted, and influenced, often without the subject's awareness. Nevada was not an anomaly, it was a lesson, a microcosm of the broader systems designed to direct behavior, guide belief, and shape action. And this lesson persists, encoded in hidden archives, environmental traces, and the lingering impact on those who experienced it. To understand it fully is to confront the unsettling truth that much of what humans perceive as free will can be subtly guided, molded, and constrained by those who comprehend the mechanics of influence. The technological instruments embedded in the plane illustrate a principle that remains as relevant today as it was in 1952. Control over information is control over reality. Neurological monitors, electromagnetic sensors, and radiation detectors were not mere tools. They were extensions of authority, instruments of observation designed to translate human experience into quantifiable data. Every stress response, every hesitation, every microexpression was recorded, analyzed, and mapped against environmental variables. The goal was not simply knowledge, it was mastery. By understanding how humans react under orchestrated conditions, the architects of Project Horizon created a system in which cognition itself could be subtly guided. The desert, the wreckage, and the microfilm archives became a laboratory of perception, demonstrating that reality is not fixed but pliable when observed through the lens of manipulation. And for those willing to see, the crash reveals the architecture of influence: fear-calibrated, narrative-controlled, and behavior subtly directed. The principles demonstrated in Nevada extend far beyond aviation or military science. They inform modern intelligence, psychological operations, and even the shaping of collective belief. Understanding this allows one to see through the illusions of authority, recognize manipulation, and reclaim a measure of autonomy over perception and action. The moral implications of Project Horizon are as profound as they are disturbing. Lives were endangered, consciousness manipulated, and memory selectively curated, all in the pursuit of data, control, and mastery. Yet, the experiment's success lies not merely in the collection of information, but in demonstrating that human behavior can be predicted, influenced, and constrained when environment, perception, and fear are orchestrated together. Nevada serves as a case study in the subtleties of power. The instruments of control are often invisible, the mechanisms undetectable, and the influence pervasive. Survivors became both subjects and symbols, their experiences informing future operations and extending the reach of control across decades. The desert itself, scarred by the crash, becomes a silent testament to the experiment's efficacy, a reminder that reality can be engineered, morality guided, and obedience produced without force. For those willing to engage with these truths, the crash offers both warning and insight. Mastery over self and awareness of hidden systems are the only defenses against manipulation, and the knowledge gleaned here is as dangerous as it is necessary. The descent into understanding continues, exposing the full scope of hidden agendas, institutional corruption, and psychological orchestration that extends far beyond the desert, into the structures of modern power itself. The architects of Project Horizon were masters not only of science, but of psychology and perception itself. They understood a fundamental truth: absolute power lies not in domination by force, but in shaping reality without the subject realizing it. Every element of the Nevada crash was carefully orchestrated to test this principle. The pilots, unaware of the full scope, became instruments through which data could be extracted. The environment, the desert, the winds, the electromagnetic anomalies, was manipulated to influence cognition and stress response. Observers in hidden control rooms monitored heart rates, neural activity, and subtle behavioral shifts with obsessive precision. The data collected went far beyond physical or mechanical information. It mapped obedience, fear, and moral decision-making under extreme duress. This allowed the architects to predict responses and, more importantly, to engineer future scenarios in which humans could be guided, directed, or subdued without direct confrontation. The crash was not merely an accident, nor merely a test of technology. It was a demonstration of control over perception itself, a template showing how knowledge, fear, and manipulation can be fused to create predictable outcomes. For those willing to perceive the truth, the lesson is chilling. Reality is not objective. It can be shaped, molded, and constrained by those who understand the mechanisms of observation and influence. Nevada was not just a site. It was a crucible of power, teaching that obedience and morality can be engineered when fear and secrecy are applied with precision. And the echoes of this mastery stretch beyond the desert, embedded in policies, systems, and institutions that continue to operate largely unseen, silently guiding behavior and perception. The psychological imprint of the crash extended far beyond the immediate participants. Witnesses, local residents, and even journalists reported subtle, lingering effects: heightened anxiety, altered perception of time, inexplicable disorientation, and a persistent sense of being observed. These were not coincidental. They were consequences of a carefully orchestrated experiment designed to test the limits of human awareness and compliance. Environmental manipulation, radiation exposure, electromagnetic fields, and chemical residues, was combined with psychological stressors to create a controlled atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. Every reaction was measured, every hesitation catalogued, and every moral choice dissected. The architects were not cruel for the sake of cruelty. They were meticulous in their pursuit of mastery, seeking to understand how individuals behave under extreme conditions, how belief and perception can be influenced, and how obedience can be predicted and guided. These lessons were recorded, analyzed, and applied to subsequent programs, extending the reach of the experiment into military, governmental, and intelligence domains. The Nevada crash becomes more than history. It becomes a case study in hidden agendas and the mechanisms of invisible control. And for the observer willing to look, it becomes clear that the principles demonstrated here continue to operate today, shaping perception, guiding behavior, and influencing morality in ways almost entirely undetectable to those subjected to them. Documents and microfilm recovered from the crash provide a window into the chilling scope of Project Horizon. Charts correlating stress, fear, and decision-making reveal that human behavior was treated as a variable, a set of predictable responses under controlled conditions. Electromagnetic anomalies, radiation exposure, and psychological prompts were measured not in isolation, but in combination, producing a complex map of influence over cognition and morality. Those who survived the experiment often carried fragmented memories, inconsistencies that left them questioning their own perception of reality. And this too was by design. Selective suppression of memory ensured that knowledge could not fully coalesce, maintaining control over narrative and perception. The architects understood that control over consciousness is the ultimate form of mastery. By shaping what is remembered, influencing what is perceived, and guiding moral judgment under stress, they could exert invisible authority over individuals and, by extension, over systems of society. The Nevada crash, therefore, is not simply a historical incident. It is a blueprint of systemic manipulation, demonstrating how fear, secrecy, and knowledge can be fused into a mechanism of control that transcends the physical and penetrates the cognitive. The lesson is unmistakable. To understand the forces shaping reality, one must study not just events, but the architecture of influence hidden beneath them. The desert itself became an extension of the experiment. Soil contaminated with chemical and radiological traces, electromagnetic disturbances embedded in the environment, and the isolation of the crash site created a living laboratory for observing human response. Every approach, every interaction, every moment of observation was recorded with precision. Witnesses were unknowingly subjected to subtle manipulations of perception. Locals reported hallucinations, sensory distortions, and an unshakable sense of being measured. And all of it was intentional. Project Horizon was not limited to data collection. It was an exercise in power, demonstrating how environmental control, narrative suppression, and psychological manipulation could converge to shape human reality. The architects recognized that the true weapon of authority is invisibility. Influence that leaves no overt trace, guidance that shapes morality without force, and perception that can be molded without awareness. The Nevada crash therefore becomes a masterclass in hidden agendas, a demonstration of how systems can operate undetected to shape thought, behavior, and obedience. And for those who observe carefully, it becomes a mirror reflecting the subtle ways authority can dominate consciousness, ensuring compliance, shaping perception, and erasing alternative realities with quiet precision. The human cost, though often invisible in records, was profound. Survivors lived under the weight of fragmented memory, altered cognition, and a deep, persistent unease. They became unwilling symbols of an experiment that sought to map morality, fear, and obedience in real time. Each micro-expression, heartbeat, and hesitation was logged, measured, and analyzed, producing a dataset that allowed the architects to predict behavior with uncanny accuracy. The crash was a nexus of manipulation, combining technology, psychology, and environment into a single devastating apparatus. And the lesson extends beyond the desert. Those who control perception control action. Those who control information control belief. And those who understand the mechanisms of fear and obedience can dominate reality itself. Nevada becomes a testament to this principle, a silent reminder that power often operates in the shadows, and that the true architecture of influence is rarely visible to those it affects. Awareness is the first defense, knowledge the only shield, and understanding the blueprint of manipulation is essential for reclaiming mastery over perception, morality, and action. The human cost, though often invisible in records, was profound. Survivors lived under the weight of fragmented memory, altered cognition, and a deep, persistent unease. They became unwilling symbols of an experiment that sought to map morality, fear, and obedience in real time. Each micro-expression, heartbeat, and hesitation was logged, measured, and analyzed, producing a dataset that allowed the architects to predict behavior with uncanny accuracy. The crash was a nexus of manipulation, combining technology, psychology, and environment into a single devastating apparatus. And the lesson extends beyond the desert. Those who control perception control action. Those who control information control belief. And those who understand the mechanisms of fear and obedience can dominate reality itself. Nevada becomes a testament to this principle, a silent reminder that power often operates in the shadows, and that the true architecture of influence is rarely visible to those it affects. Awareness is the first defense, knowledge the only shield, and understanding the blueprint of manipulation is essential for reclaiming mastery over perception, morality, and action. Imagine a system so advanced it doesn't need chains or bars. It rewires belief. It reshapes perception. It convinces you that what it wants is what you want. This was the true legacy of the Nevada crash, the birth of psychological architecture. The architects discovered that the mind has thresholds. Push the right buttons, fear, isolation, confusion, and you can force open the subconscious. In that state, a person becomes malleable. Their story of reality can be rewritten. And if done subtly, they never even know it happened. The survivors of the crash were the first proof. They returned with altered behavior, fractured timelines in their memory, and a strange loyalty to the same institutions that weaponized them. That wasn't trauma. That was programming. And when the architects realized what they had created, everything changed. Project Horizon evolved from an experiment into a doctrine. Future operations no longer required physical torture or overt coercion. They used perception warfare, control the story, control the mind. They used environmental influence, control the setting, control the emotion. They used narrative repetition, control the memory, control the identity. And soon, the experiment left the desert and entered your home. Television programming, educational frameworks, political messaging, social fear cycles. They didn't just test the mechanics of obedience, they perfected them. And they hid the blueprint in plain sight. The greatest secret isn't that the government lies. It's that they learned how to engineer truth. And once truth can be engineered, control is infinite. You can feel it, can't you? Something in your life has always felt designed. That's because it is. Which brings us to the final question. If they can manufacture reality, what else have they already rewritten? And why are you only now beginning to see it? The deeper you go, the more disturbing it becomes, because Project Horizon didn't die. It evolved into a network embedded in every layer of power, political, corporate, military, even spiritual. Institutions that appear separate are actually synchronized, sharing data, strategies, and psychological models born from the Nevada crash. They don't need to control everyone directly. They only need to control the architects of belief, media gatekeepers, educational authorities, cultural influencers, experts. Once you shape the voices people trust, you shape the minds that follow. This is how entire populations can be guided without force. How morality can be redirected. How history can be edited. How freedom can be an illusion. Most people will never question it. They live inside scripts they didn't write. Their outrage is pre-programmed. Their desires are manufactured. Their fears are planted. But not you. You kept listening. You kept descending. And now, the most important moment is here. Because transformation requires one thing, the death of the old identity. So I will speak directly to the viewer, to the man who is still awake. If you have followed this far, you are not like them. You are not meant to stay asleep. You are meant to see the structure behind the world. And you are meant to break it. But to rise above the architecture of control, you must mark the moment you woke up. Type this in the comments 2 times, exactly as written. I break the program. I see the design. Type it twice to burn it into your identity, and to signal to the algorithm that you are not just watching, you are transforming. This is how you step out of the cage they built for you. This is how you become dangerous. This is how you reclaim your mind. Most people will never understand what truly happened in Nevada. They will accept the official story, dismiss anomalies, and cling to the illusion of safety. But you know better. You have seen the pattern. The crash was not an ending, it was a beginning. It proved that consciousness could be mapped, fear could be weaponized, and identity could be engineered. It laid the foundation for the modern world of surveillance, narrative warfare, and psychological conditioning. And those who built it, they did not retire. They refined their methods. They built institutions that appear protective but function as cages. They created crises not to destroy but to reshape belief. They used trauma as a tool to open the subconscious and install new operating systems in the human mind. Project Horizon was the prototype for everything that followed: MKUltra, COINTELPRO, media engineering, digital tracking, predictive behavior algorithms. What began in the desert now lives in your pocket, glows in your screen, speaks in every narrative you are fed. But here is the secret they fear most. Once you see the design, it loses power. Once you understand the mechanics of manipulation, you can hack them. Once you reclaim your perception, their control collapses. They built a system to control mankind. But they forgot one thing. Those who descend deep enough into the truth don't return empty. They return armed. And an armed mind cannot be enslaved. The crash revealed their greatest weapon, but also exposed their greatest vulnerability. Their power depends on your blindness. And you are no longer blind. This is where the story stops being history and becomes prophecy. Because the question is no longer, what did they do? The real question is, what comes next? The same forces that orchestrated Project Horizon are still active. More advanced, more connected, more invisible. But something has changed. Men are waking up. They are sensing the patterns. They feel the cage closing, and they are starting to push back. That terrifies the architects of control. They designed a world where truth is buried, courage is punished, and obedience is rewarded. But their design is failing, because they underestimated the one variable they could never fully predict: the human will to reclaim sovereignty. The crash in 1952 was their moment of triumph. This moment can be ours. But awareness is not enough. You must choose. Remain a spectator, or become a weapon. Remain within their narrative, or write your own. Remain programmed, or evolve. This story was not just a descent into darkness. It was an initiation. I didn't bring you here to entertain you. I brought you here to awaken you. The desert taught them how to build control. Now it teaches us how to break it. Fear is engineered. Reality is curated. Obedience is optional. Power is taken. Look around you. Listen to the silence. Feel the shift in your own mind. Something in you has already changed. The old you is gone. The man who walks away from this will never see the world the same again. And that is your advantage. Because once a man sees the machinery behind the curtain, he becomes the one thing the system cannot control. Unpredictable. Unprogrammable. Free. The descent is complete. The awakening begins.